Throughout history, punishment was often designed to instill fear, but few methods were as gruesome as the Brazen Bull, an execution device that turned human suffering into a horrifying spectacle. As we explore the most gruesome punishments for men through history, this ancient Greek invention stands as one of the most chilling examples of cruelty. But who created this monstrous device, and was its own inventor truly its first victim? The Brazen Bull was supposedly designed by Perillos of Athens, a metalworker commissioned by Phalaris, the ruthless tyrant of Acragas, modern-day Agrigento, Sicily. This hollow bronze structure was built to resemble a life-sized bull, with a small door to imprison the condemned. Once inside, a fire would be lit beneath the bull, slowly roasting the victim alive. What made it even more horrifying was its acoustic design. The pipes inside converted the victim's screams into eerie, animalistic bellows, creating a perverse form of entertainment for spectators. According to legend, Phalaris, intrigued by the device, forced Perillos himself inside to test it. He was pulled out before death, only to be executed shortly after. While some historians question the authenticity of this tale, ancient sources confirm the bull's existence. Diodorus Siculus, a 1st century BCE historian, wrote that Phalaris used the device to eliminate political enemies. Later, Roman accounts referenced the bull as a symbol of tyranny, while medieval texts continued to depict it as the ultimate instrument of cruelty. Though its historical use remains uncertain beyond ancient Greece, the legend of the Brazen Bull endured for centuries as a grim reminder of how power could twist punishment into something terrifyingly theatrical. Blood Eagle, the Vikings' dark ritual. Among the most gruesome punishments for men through history, few are as infamous as the Blood Eagle, a Viking execution method shrouded in both terror and mystery. According to medieval Norse sagas, this gruesome ritual was inflicted upon King Ella of Northumbria by the sons of Ragnar Lodbrok as revenge for their father's death. But was it ever truly practiced, or is it just a terrifying legend? The sagas claim that after Ella had Ragnar thrown into a pit of venomous snakes, his sons, led by Ivar the Boneless, exacted revenge through a horrifying method. The execution supposedly involved carving open Ella's back, breaking his ribs outward like wings, and pulling his lungs through the wounds. This act was said to be a sacrificial offering to Odin, ensuring the victim's suffering pleased the gods. However, no contemporary sources confirm this event, leaving historians divided on its authenticity. The Blood Eagle appears primarily in medieval texts, such as those by Snorri Sturluson, written centuries after the events. Some scholars believe it was an exaggeration, crafted to emphasize Viking brutality. Others suggest a mistranslation of poetic descriptions of battle wounds may have turned a more conventional execution into a ritualistic horror story. If real, the Blood Eagle may have been connected to Viking sacrificial traditions, where warriors dedicated fallen enemies to Odin through blood offerings. Whether a historical practice or mythological invention, the Blood Eagle remains one of the most debated and horrifying punishments in Viking history. Rat torture, nature's cruel test. Among the most gruesome punishments for men, few were as horrifying as rat torture, a method that turned nature's instincts into a gruesome tool of suffering. Used in medieval Europe, totalitarian regimes and infamous dungeons, this punishment inflicted both physical agony and psychological terror. One of the earliest recorded uses of rat torture occurred during the Dutch Revolt, 1568 to 1648, where Spanish forces allegedly used it on rebels. A common method involved placing a starving rat in a metal container on a prisoner's stomach or chest, then heating the container. The desperate rat, seeking escape, would gnaw through the victim's flesh, causing excruciating pain. Rat torture wasn't limited to the Middle Ages. In the 20th century, it was reportedly used by secret police in totalitarian regimes to break prisoners psychologically. Some captives were locked in cells filled with starving rats, leading to sleep deprivation, terror, and severe injuries. This method, designed to instill paralyzing fear, was documented in several oppressive regimes across South America and Eastern Europe. The Tower of London is also linked to this gruesome practice. Historical accounts suggest that prisoners were thrown into rat-infested dungeons where swarms of rodents gnawed at their flesh in the darkness. Whether used for interrogation, execution, or intimidation, rat torture stands as one of history's most terrifying punishments, where victims were left at the mercy of nature's cruelest survivors. The rack, medieval stretching device. The rack, used throughout medieval Europe, this brutal method of torture was commonly employed during the Spanish Inquisition, the Tudor era, and beyond. Its victims included both political prisoners and religious dissenters, leaving behind a legacy of suffering recorded by historians of the time. The Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478, used the rack extensively to extract confessions from accused heretics and political enemies. Prisoners were tied at the wrists and ankles, then slowly stretched by a system of rollers and pulleys. The pain was unbearable, with joints dislocating and muscles tearing as the body was pulled apart. Many victims, unable to endure the torment, confessed to crimes they never committed, making the rack a symbol of fear and forced compliance. One of the most famous victims of the rack was Guy Fawkes, the conspirator behind the failed gunpowder plot of 1605. Imprisoned in the Tower of London, Fawkes was subjected to brutal interrogation. His once bold signature, reduced to an unrecognizable scrawl, revealed the physical toll of his suffering. The rack's role in breaking his resistance remains one of history's most infamous examples of state-sanctioned torture. The Tudor period saw the rack frequently used, particularly under Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. Chroniclers like Raphael Holinshed recorded its use on traitors, spies, and religious dissidents. It was kept in the Tower of London's dungeons, where its creaking sound struck fear into prisoners. As one of the most feared torture devices in medieval history, the rack was not just a method of punishment. It was a weapon of control, ensuring that silence and obedience came at the price of unbearable pain. Sawing method, split punishment. Among the many brutal punishments inflicted on men throughout history, sawing remains one of the most gruesome. Used as a method of execution in ancient Rome, medieval China, and religious tradition, it was designed to inflict prolonged agony while serving as a warning to others. One of the most notorious figures associated with sawing as execution is Emperor Caligula of ancient Rome. Known for his tyranny and unpredictable cruelty, Caligula allegedly had those who defied him sawed in half, often from the groin downward to maximize suffering. Some sources claim the victims were suspended upside down, ensuring blood flow to the brain kept them alive longer. However, like many stories about Caligula's excesses, the historical accuracy of these accounts remains debated. In medieval China, historical records suggest that sawing was used as a punishment for criminals and traitors. This method often involved a large two-person saw, and executioners worked slowly to prolong the suffering of the condemned. While its use was likely not widespread, it remained one of the most feared punishments in Chinese legal history. Religious texts also reference sawing as a form of execution. The Book of Hebrews, Hebrews 11:37, states that some martyrs were sawn in two, with later interpretations suggesting that the prophet Isaiah may have suffered this fate under King Manasseh. Though no definitive evidence supports this claim, the reference shows that sawing was at least known as an extreme form of punishment in the ancient world. Impalement, Vlad's dark legacy. Among the brutal punishments inflicted on men throughout history, impalement stands out as one of the most horrifying. This execution method, designed to maximize suffering and instill fear, was used by rulers and empires to punish enemies, traitors, and those who dared to resist authority. While it existed long before his time, no historical figure is more closely associated with impalement than Vlad III of Wallachia, known as Vlad the Impaler. Vlad III ruled Wallachia in the 15th century and earned his notorious reputation through his merciless use of impalement. One infamous account describes how Ottoman envoys, refusing to remove their turbans in his court, were impaled as punishment. But his most chilling act took place during the siege of Târgoviște in 1462, when Sultan Mehmed II's Ottoman army marched into Wallachia, only to find thousands of impaled corpses lining the battlefield. This terrifying sight was meant to break enemy morale, demonstrating Vlad's brutality and psychological warfare tactics. However, impalement was not unique to Vlad. The ancient Near East, particularly the Assyrians, documented its use as a method of public execution for captured enemies and rebels. Assyrian reliefs depict victims hoisted onto sharpened stakes, left to die in agony as a warning to others. Babylonians and Persians also used similar methods, solidifying impalement as one of the oldest and most feared punishments in history. Horse method, four-way sentence. Among the most brutal punishments inflicted on men, few were as horrific as drawing and quartering by horses. This execution method, designed to tear the human body apart, was reserved for those accused of treason, rebellion, or attacks on rulers. It was used in Europe and Asia, ensuring a slow and agonizing death that served as a public warning. One of the most infamous cases was Robert François d'Amiens, executed in France 1757 for attempting to assassinate King Louis XV. His limbs were tied to 4 horses, which pulled in opposite directions until his body was ripped apart. The process was slow and gruesome, requiring executioners to cut through tendons to finish the job. The spectacle was meant to terrify onlookers and discourage treason. In medieval England, this punishment was commonly used for traitors, including William Wallace in 1305. After being hanged and mutilated, Wallace's body was torn apart by horses, with his remains displayed across the kingdom. This execution emphasized the absolute authority of the monarchy, making treason the most feared crime. The Mongol Empire also used horses to execute prisoners, often by dismemberment or trampling. This was particularly used against rebels and captured enemies, reinforcing Mongol dominance through fear. Whether in Europe or Asia, the horse method was one of the most gruesome punishments in history, designed not just to kill, but to make an unforgettable example of those who defied authority. Breaking wheel, the bone crusher. Throughout history, rulers sought to punish and humiliate criminals in the most agonizing ways possible. And one of the most gruesome methods ever inflicted on men was the breaking wheel. This execution device, used widely in France and Germany, was designed not only to kill, but to inflict prolonged suffering while serving as a public warning. One of the most notorious victims of the breaking wheel was Peter Niers, a feared bandit and alleged serial killer in 16th century Germany. Accused of murdering over 500 people, Niers was subjected to 3 days of brutal torture before being placed on the wheel. Executioners shattered his limbs one by one with an iron bar, leaving him to die slowly and painfully. His body was then put on display, ensuring that his horrific fate would deter others from a life of crime. The breaking wheel was commonly used in France and Germany, where it became a symbol of justice through suffering. Criminals were often bound to the wheel, and executioners systematically shattered their bones before leaving them to die of shock or exposure. Their broken bodies were sometimes mounted on poles, serving as a grim warning to anyone who dared to defy the law. Another infamous case was the execution of Matthias Klostermeier, known as the Bavarian Ripper, in 1771. A notorious highwayman, Klostermeier was sentenced to the breaking wheel, where his bones were methodically broken before he was finally put out of his misery. His public execution drew large crowds, demonstrating the state's commitment to brutal justice. Feared across Europe, the breaking wheel was one of the most agonizing punishments inflicted on men, ensuring that death was not only inevitable, but unbearably slow. Castration, the eunuch punishment. Among the most dehumanizing punishments in history, castration was used to strip men of power, ambition, and legacy. Whether to eliminate political rivals or create loyal servants, this practice was widespread in Byzantium, China, and the Ottoman Empire, shaping the fate of those subjected to it. In the Byzantine Empire, castration was a common method to remove threats to the throne. Basil the Parakoimomenos, castrated as a child to prevent him from ruling, later became a powerful court official, proving that even those punished in this way could still influence imperial politics. Byzantine rulers often saw this fate as worse than execution, ensuring rivals could never produce heirs or claim leadership. In China, eunuchs played a dominant role in the imperial court, particularly during the Ming dynasty. These castrated men were entrusted with high-ranking positions as they had no family ties to create dynastic threats. One of the most famous eunuchs, Zheng He, led China's great naval expeditions, demonstrating how eunuchs could wield immense authority despite their suffering. However, many were also seen as manipulative power brokers, resented by the scholar official class. The Ottoman Empire also relied on eunuchs, especially in Topkapi Palace, where they controlled the imperial harem and access to the Sultan. The chief black eunuch held enormous influence, serving as a trusted advisor in palace affairs. Castration ensured these men posed no threat to royal bloodlines, making them ideal for sensitive roles. Despite its cruelty, castration shaped the political landscape of multiple empires, proving that even those robbed of personal power could still rise to positions of immense influence. History has seen men subjected to unimaginable punishments, from impalement and the rack to castration and the breaking wheel. These brutal methods served as warnings, control tactics, and political tools, shaping the fate of countless victims.